Good evening, councillors. My devices tell me it's 7 o'clock, so we will make a start. You are very welcome to join us for the Rushcliffe Borough Council's Governance Scrutiny Committee. Thank you for taking the time to come this evening, and particularly to our outside guests. This is our first online governance scrutiny group meeting since February, and I would like to remind everyone that the meeting is being live streamed on YouTube. A recording of the meeting will be available afterwards on the council's YouTube channel. In addition, under the local authorities executive arrangements, meetings and access to information England regulations 2012, other people may film, record, tweet or blog from this meeting. The use of any such images or sound recordings is not under the council's control. All participants in the meeting are reminded that to ensure the audio for the meeting is as clear as possible, all microphones should be muted as a default setting to keep background noise to a minimum. I'm pretty confident actually that this evening's audience will not match that of this weekend's FA Cup final. Firstly, I would like to ask all the participants to confirm that they can see and hear proceedings and speak.
Yes, Councillor Purdy-Horan, I can hear you, and hopefully you can hear me.
Sorry, I've lost my video feed.
We can still see you, and
okay.
We can hear you.
Okay, so if I go through the list, sorry, my apologies. So Councillor Adair, can you see and hear?
I'm okay. I can see and hear. Yep.
Thank you. Councillor. Okay, I think we're struggling there. I'll move on. Councillor Lizzie Howitt.
Hi, yes, I can hear and see you.
Thank you, Lizzie. Councillor Kevin Shaw.
Yes, I can see and hear, thank you.
Excellent. Councillor John Stockwood.
Yes, I can see and hear, and I can unmute myself. Thank you.
Excellent. Councillor Maureen Stockwood.
Yes, I can see and hear.
And Councillor Devinder Verdi.
Yes, Chair, I can hear and see you. All good.
Excellent. And Leanne Ashmore, I heard you. And just to clarify, Peter Linfield.
Yes, I can hear and see you, and hopefully you can hear and see me.
Fantastic. Sarah Whitaker.
Hi, yes, I can see and hear you.
Fantastic. And our facilities officer for this evening, Tracy.
Hello, yes, I'm here and I can hear you. Thank you.
Excellent. Good. Thank you very much. Okay. Moving on slightly. In respect of asking a question or wishing to speak during the meeting, please would any councillor who wishes to speak raise their hand and keep it raised until they are invited to speak by the chairman, who at the moment can't see you. When you are asked to speak, please unmute your microphone, and once you have spoken, please remute your microphone again, because these microphones are extremely sensitive. In addition, may I ask councillors that if you have a question to ask during the meeting, please would you write it in the chat function that is available, and it will allow me to take each question in turn following the officers' presentations. In respect of voting, I will ask for any councillors who wish to abstain or vote against an item to raise their hand first. If no councillor indicates, then we will take that as the item has been carried. And may I move to the first item on the agenda? Item 1, declarations of interest, please. Do we have any? I take that as a no. Item 2, any apologies for absence?
Yes, Chairman, we have apologies from Councillor Sims and we have Councillor Maureen Stockwood as a substitute. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Item 3, minutes of the meeting held on the 6th of February 2020. I move those. Do I have a seconder?
Happy to second, Mr. Chair, and I accept the answer given to the action. Thank you.
Thank you. Are we all agree? Is there anybody who wishes to object or abstain to that proposal? Okay, I take that as the minutes are agreed. Thank you.
Sorry, Chair. Councillor Shaw, you had your hand up just then.
Yeah, I need to abstain because I wasn't there.
Okay.
I can't vote because I wasn't there.
That's fair enough. Do we wish to go through a vote? No, I'm assuming that they're accepted. Thank you. Can we move on to item 4, internal audit report for Q4 2019-2020?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just for the purpose of the meeting, I just want to introduce myself. My name is Amjad Ali. I'm a senior manager with RSM, and we've undertook the internal audit work in our final year as your internal auditors during 2019 and 20. In front of you, you've got agenda item 4, which is our progress report. The actual report starts on page 11, if we go by the page numbers at the bottom of each page. And you will see there that since the last Governance and Scrutiny Group meeting, we have finalised the 4 remaining internal audit pieces of work, and they are detailed in section 2 of our report, which is on page 14. The 4 reports were garden waste, property leases, main accounting system, and follow-up. That's right, that's the page there. You will see across those reports, we've given a substantial assurance across the 3 assurance reports we've done. And for the follow-up work, we've given that as good progress, which is, again, the highest level of assurance we can give when we are following up internal audit work. We've only raised 8 low priority actions across those 4 reports, which is a good result, a pleasing result for the council. In section 2.1, Mr. Chairman, on page 15, we tend to highlight here any significant areas that we want to bring to your attention, things where we raise maybe high or medium priority actions. But again, it's pleasing to note, as I just mentioned, that we've not raised any with regards to that. So the actions we have raised are a low priority. So there's nothing much to report with regards to that in this section. The other section I like to draw your attention to is Appendix A, which is on pages 17 and 18. And these detail the previous audits that we presented to this group during the course of the year. That's just for information purposes only. So overall, Mr. Chairman, the 4 reports, as I mentioned, pleasing result. We found some good controls in place around those areas. And for the follow-up, good progress is being made. We followed up 29 management actions from the previous year. And it's pleasing to say, Mr. Chairman, that 23 of those were fully implemented or superseded. We did re-raise 6 low priority actions where work was ongoing or had not been fully completed, or was in, so they're in our report, which is with management. I've nothing else really to add at this point, but I can take any questions from members.
Thank you, and thank you for that presentation. Are there any questions or comments from councillors? Raise your hand. Councillor John Stockwood.
Thank you very much for the update. With regards to the 6 outstanding actions, do we have a timescale for them to be implemented, or any particular reasons why they can't be implemented? Thank you.
Thank you for that question. In the full follow-up report, which has been given to management, there are implementation dates and action plans in that report. So there were 3 actions which were, as I mentioned earlier, all 6 actions were low priority. Now, what we deem by low priority is things that are housekeeping type of issues that we raise, where things maybe not been signed or dated. So there's nothing significant coming out of those issues. Nevertheless, management have agreed an action plan, and there are implementation dates in our main follow-up report. So going forward, Mr. Chairman, your new auditors who are coming in will no doubt follow those up. So they'll stay on that radar going forward. In the next agenda item, which I'll talk about shortly, we have actually detailed what those 6 actions were. And as I mentioned, they were more of housekeeping type issues rather than any sort of significant control failures.
Mr. Linfield.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Sorry. Yeah. Well, in fact, Amjad's just probably beat me to the punch there. I was just going to make the point that obviously the follow-up with the new auditors, they also pick up the whatever's left in terms of outstanding recommendations. So there will be followed through.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions or comments? Councillor Verdi.
Thank you, Chair. Really just picking up on Councillor Stockwood's point there. I mean, I had similar questions, and although we are referring to these matters being picked up by the new auditors and details on timescales and so on, I'm curious in terms of some of the issues. For example, on page 29, 2.2, you know, write-offs had been appropriately authorised, but refresher training was needed, or the corporate procurement strategy has not been updated on the website. I would have thought these are matters which could be dealt with fairly swiftly, particularly with relation to corporate procurement strategy and for suppliers and contractors, partners to be able to view an updated version of that. I would like assurances that that will be done fairly swiftly, because they seem to me to be, for want of a better expression, quick fixes. Thank you, Chair.
Mr. Linfield.
Yeah, no, agree. I mean, to be frank, obviously we've been distracted with other things, so perhaps some things that might have ordinarily happened a bit quicker haven't happened as quickly as they should, linked to things like COVID. So take on board that point, and we will make sure the procurement strategy is on the website.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments or questions? Thank you, councillors. We'll go to the vote. Are there any objections or abstentions in terms of accepting this report? No. So may I take it then that we accept the report on this item? Thank you. Okay, moving on to item 5, Internal Audit Annual Report 2019-20.
Thank you, Chairman. So following on from the previous agenda item where I mentioned that we've now completed all the internal audit work in line with the internal audit plan for 2019-20, we're in a position to give the council the annual opinion. So our report starts on page 25, but the main section for members is on page 27, which is section 1.1 on page 27. So you'll see from that, we've provided the council with a positive internal audit opinion and noted that the council has an adequate and effective framework for risk management, governance and internal controls. But we recognise that some enhancements can be made to the framework to ensure it remains adequate and effective. That is a positive opinion, Chair. And again, as I mentioned, it's a good result for the council. In section 1.3, Mr. Chairman, on page 28, we've given some details on how we come to form our opinion around governance, risk management and internal controls. In terms of governance, we undertook a review of the governance arrangements at the council, and we concluded that the council can take substantial assurance from this. In terms of risk management, we review risk management systems and processes as part of all the audit works that we've done during the year. And we also undertook a cyber risk management review in the year as well, from which we raised 2 medium priority actions. In terms of internal controls, we undertook 15 internal audit reviews during the year, of which 13 resulted in substantial assurance, which is the highest level of assurance we can give, and 2 that resulted in reasonable assurance. We also have done some ad hoc work around some advisory reviews that management have requested during the year, but that doesn't form part of that opinion as it was just advisory pieces of work. For the ones where we have provided assurance, Mr. Chairman, we've raised 40 management actions during the year, 6 medium and 34 low. In section 2.2 on page 29, we've detailed the work we've done with regards to the follow-up, and as you've just asked some questions on that already, the 29 actions that we followed up from last year, 6 hadn't been fully implemented, and the details are there for management to action those. Appendix A on page 31, Mr. Chairman, the ranges of opinions that we can give. You'll see from that there are 2 positive opinions and 2 negative opinions. The council has been given the second opinion, but nevertheless, it's still a positive opinion. Some may argue why didn't we get the top opinion, considering that a number of those reports are substantial assurance, but we have raised 40 management actions, and nevertheless, as I said, this is still a positive and a pleasing result for the council. Appendix B details all the internal audit work that we completed during the course of the year, and all those reports will have been presented to this group during the year. So I'll take any questions that members may have.
Thank you. Are there any questions and comments from councillors? I see no hands raised. Okay, the recommendation, it is recommended that Governance Scrutiny Group review and approve the 2019-20 annual governance statement. I suggest that we have had an opportunity to review the document. Are there any abstentions or objections to approving this document? I take that you are happy to approve. Thank you very much. And if we move on to...
Mr. Chairman, apologies. I was just wondering if I could just add a point, please. This is going to be our last meeting as your internal auditors. I've worked with the council for about 10 years as your internal auditor and got to know the council and members and management team in that time. So I've just wanted to take this opportunity, Mr. Chairman, to thank the group and also a special thanks to the management team during our tenure in the fact that they've been outstanding. They provided all the information we needed and the audits have gone very smoothly. So take this opportunity to say thank you very much and wish everybody at Rushcliffe all the best for the future.
Amjad, I do apologise. I was racing ahead. We've had an excellent relationship with your company over the years. Chris and his colleagues have given us excellent support in this area. I actually sang your praises as a company in February, if I recall, because as an avid follower of horoscopes, there was a warning that we might not see each other for 6 months. So I do apologise for missing it now. Please do pass our best wishes to your company, and thank you for all the support you've given us over the years. Very professional. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Bye-bye. You're welcome to stay, by the way.
I'll leave the meeting if that's okay, Chairman.
We won't be offended.
Okay, so I'll go and celebrate that now. Thank you very much, and all the best.
Good night.
Right.
Item 6, Constitution update, and the report of the monitoring officer is attached.
Good evening, councillors. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes, indeed.
Yes, okay. Sorry.
Good evening.
Good evening. This report presents the council's constitution. As councillors are aware, the constitution was last presented to full council on the 16th of July, having been amended to incorporate the virtual meeting regulations and other minor amendments. The constitution contains the council's rules of procedure, and it's a legal requirement that it's kept up to date. The constitution is therefore presented to this group this evening so that a detailed review of it may be considered. To assist members in actioning a review of the Constitution, I have prepared a table of suggested areas for consideration, and that is at Appendix A of the report. I think Laura's going to bring it up. So those are suggestions only, and members are invited to consider the Constitution in its entirety and agree other sections for review. The Constitution was last amended prior to the July 2020 amendments in 2018, and that was primarily around the public speaking protocols. So as a document as a whole, it hasn't been considered for quite some time. So really members are invited to have a look at it and pick out any areas that they consider are expedient for review. The recommendations in the report are that the group consider the suggestions for review in of the Constitution as I've set out at Appendix A, that the group consider other sections for review, and that the group recommends any amendments that it might consider appropriate following the review for adoption by full council. I'm happy to take any questions on that. Otherwise, over to you for consideration.
Thank you, Ms. Saul. Can I just ask at first, are you suggesting then that we are embarking on a consultation for essentially various parts of the Constitution?
It's an opportunity to review the Constitution. The council committed in 2019 at annual council to annually review its Constitution. That sits neatly with this group. As I say, it was last reviewed, I suppose the most comprehensive review of it was in 2018. But really, that was quite limited in its scope. There's an opportunity now to have a look at the document as an entire document and really sort of pick out areas that the group considers are right for review and should be reviewed.
So are you expecting possibly that we come back to this as well at the next meeting?
Yes, I think that perhaps what might be useful is if members can consider this evening areas for review, then a timetable can be formulated. Dependent on what those areas might be, members might feel more comfortable with having sort of a working group set up to do reviews of particular sections, or may feel more comfortable that this group can review them. It's really an opportunity to just sort of look at the Constitution and think about anything that needs to be reviewed and how members want to reflect that. It's a bit of an open suggestion, really.
Thank you for that clarification. So, councillors, are there any comments or questions? Councillor Walker.
Hello. One thing I would like to recommend to change is the use of the word chairman to one that's more gender neutral, to the one that is used in most of the rest of the world, and that is the word chair. So that would be my first point. The second point is the notice of the motions that was put forward. I personally don't like the idea of there being no more than 3 motions. I feel that we are paid to represent our communities. We're paid to kind of attend these meetings, and we shouldn't really complain about the length of them, because that's what we're here to do. And if we have 3 to how many motions to get through, we are that kind of should get through them, because that's our job. I think that's probably my 2 points so far, just to kind of get the ball rolling. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Verdi.
Thank you, Chair. Just picking up on Councillor Walker's point there, actually, I was going to raise my own views on this particular suggestion. I mean, firstly, I have a question for our monitoring officer. In terms of motions, what is the current guideline or restriction or limitation? We're suggesting the 3, but before I make my own comments, in terms of the current situation, I'd just like clarification on what is the parameters, Sanjit, if you're able to clarify that.
In terms of numbers, there are no parameters. It literally, we've got the duration of the meeting. So our council meeting runs to 10 o'clock. It can be extended by consent to 10:30, and 10:30 is an absolute cut-off. As members will recall from the March meeting, the business didn't get concluded within the time allocated for the meeting, and then was picked up at another meeting in July. The effect of that was that some things had moved on somewhat, and then there were points of clarification that had to be made in relation to those particular motions. So there's no limit on them. The only limitation, I suppose, is in terms of timing. In terms of their scope, they have to be in relation to matters that relate to the borough. So there are things that there are motions that could be presented that could not be accepted because they weren't within scope. But there are other things in terms of managing motions, which I've put in the table. So things like duration of speeches, and timing, and those sorts of things. If members aren't minded to limit the number of motions, there are other avenues that could be explored.
Yep.
Thank you for that clarification regarding the current situation. So, I mean, my personal view on this is that the suggestion seems sensible, because you know, not throwing away Councillor Walker's suggestion in terms of, you know, we are here to do a job, and yes, of course, to represent our constituents and debate matters. However, council business can take up considerable time, and not that the meetings are too long, but in order to get through appropriate business, as our monitoring officer has just highlighted, and also to stop potentially repetitive motions, I think the suggestion to have offline debates with leaders of our political groups would hopefully filter and allow us to spend the time that we do have to do exactly what Councillor Walker has suggested, which is to sensibly use our time and to address appropriate within scope motions and debates. So I personally think that that is actually a very good suggestion, together with the following one regarding length of speeches. So I think I'd be in favour of that if we are moving forward. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Anybody else wishing to speak? Councillor John Stockwood.
Thank you very much, Chair. So there's a list.
You might have to speak up.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
That's better.
Sorry, Mr. Chair. We're presented with a list of ideas. The bottom 2, standing orders relating to contracts and member code of conduct, I think they're going to be driven by an external events. Standing orders relating to contracts related, there's a lot of stuff I imagine relating to EU regulation, which will probably be changed. And then there's an LGA code of conduct review ongoing, which everybody's had a chance to be consulted in. So that'll probably drive those last 2. So I think those 2 would be driven by external events as to what we regards forward. So the points, particularly from the list in the paper, are around the council's choices around managing business. My personal view is the council has made a choice, for good or bad, that if you're upset with your neighbour's front porch, you can speak for 5 minutes. For us to say that you can only speak for 3 minutes if you're upset about something that affects hundreds of thousands of people and multi-million-pound decision would seem an imbalance to me. And so I think people should be allowed to speak at full council meetings if that's appropriate. The main point that I've taken from the meetings that have happened is around whether the motions are really calling for scrutiny. So it's this previous decisions and motions. Are they really people asking for a scrutiny item rather than an action from council? So that's that. So the one part of the order of business points that have been raised that I would particularly be interested in would be about being previous decisions and motions, provision to reject motions where they relate to matters more suitable to review by scrutiny, and not so much the other ones. With regards to the overall constitution, my particular point of that I would like to understand more is about the delegated decisions, and particularly the what's called the asset investment group. So at full council, the most recent full council, we considered all our full memberships of all committees and working groups. Even a task and finish working group that I was a part of got reconstituted for the Bingham Leisure Centre, and I declare my interest in Bingham. But there was no mention of the asset investment group. In the asset management plan, there is mention of the asset investment group, and the asset investment group clearly met and made a decision, and it's recorded in the cabinet decision 2 weeks ago regarding the Moorbridge Road units. So the other point that I would raise about the asset improvement group is that my recollection is that in September 2017, we updated the asset investment plan or strategy, and that the asset improvement group was referred to there as the asset improvement committee, because it was specifically changed from a group to a committee in that decision of council. So it seems there is a committee, what should be referred to as a committee, making delegated decisions and recommendations to cabinet, but I don't feel that it's represented either in the constitution or in any references coming forward, other than I can see it being mentioned in the asset management plan, and it's making recommendations to cabinet. So that particular when it comes to the constitution, I'd like to see or have greater understanding why committees and task and finish working groups are all listed at council, but this particular group doesn't seem to ever get mentioned, but it continues to roll on year after year. It has functions which I think should be recorded quite clearly along with all the other scheme of delegation. And so I would like in any future review of the whole constitution to talk about that particular thing. And I've mentioned which points of the order of business I think are most worthy of support. Thank you.
Is Mrs. Sull?
Thank you, Chair. In terms of the procurement strategy, procurement rules and the contract procedure rules, they haven't been looked at for quite some time, and Councillor Stockwood is quite right insofar as he mentions the European legislative changes that will be brought forward and that we're all anticipating. Mr. Linfield, as we sort of touched on in the last report, is also reviewing the actual procurement strategy as well. We're not envisaging any, obviously I can't speak for certain, but we're not envisaging any huge changes in relation to EU, so in relation to the procurement regulations. We think we're going to retain something similar to what we've got now. It does seem like a prudent time to review those because they're so crucial to the council's business, the way that the council operates. And then if there are any legal changes, legislative changes towards the end of the year, they can be picked up as part of that. But the group may wish to sort of think about perhaps programming that particular section of the Constitution for review later on in the year, so that there's a little bit more clarity around that. Just picking up on the asset investment strategy, Madison, I'm not sure if Leanne might want to say more about this. Under the scheme of delegations, it is within the Executive Manager for Transformations portfolio and delegations to deal with the strategic asset management. And then the delegation in relation to acquisition and disposal of land, that is set out. Unfortunately, there's no page numbers on that, but it's in part 1, Appendix 1 of the Constitution. And hopefully that adds some clarity.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Linfield, you had your hand up.
Well, a couple of points really. Firstly, just to partly correct Sanjay on the contract procedure rules. There were, when we had the last full constitution review a couple of years ago, it did include the contract procedure rules because we had to incorporate all the stuff to do with due north and electronic tendering. That's not to say that they're under constant review, because the world of procurement is constantly changing. So they should be part of an annual review in any case, as with the financial regulations. On the asset investment group point, the asset investment group was constituted as part of the asset investment strategy, which was approved by full council as part of the budget. I think it was a couple of years ago. And so that's really how it's been constituted in terms of the membership of that particular group.
Okay. Any other questions, comments? Do you want to come back, Councillor Stockwood?
Well, Mr. Chairman, just to reiterate, I am aware. Yeah, you're quite right. A decision of the council created a group, but that's not reflected in the Constitution. There is a group of councillors and officers meeting to make delegated decisions. In September 2017, I was actually updated to actually formally make it a committee, so that it could have that function of making multi-million pound investments on behalf of the council. And I just really think that, yeah, each decision of the council, there are decisions to have a member working group for Leisure Centre, a West Bridgeford Specialist Banks and SEAL advisory group. These decisions, yeah, they happen at council, but then they get reflected into the Constitution. And I'm just curious about the ongoing role of what I think is actually the Asset Investment Committee, according to the decisions of the council. But if I'll perhaps send a copy of the decisions of council from September 2017 to and discuss the matter with officers to help my understanding at a later date. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yep. Councillor Shaw, did you have your hand up? You're currently on mute.
Yeah, I am. Yeah, that's it. I just wanted to speak on behalf of Jen Walker, basically just to confirm the feeling of the three independents is that we agree with her entirely, that there should be no attempt whatsoever to reduce the number of motions. The suggestion as it's written at the moment doesn't make sense, because you're talking about there being one per party or maximum of three. Well, that doesn't equate, does it? It can't be three if it's going to be one per party. It doesn't equate that at all. And also, we like the idea that at the moment the mayor goes round and invites all the group leaders to speak, and we think that's a practice that is highly commendable and should not in any way be changed, because I think it's important that all views from all parties and all areas of the borough are heard at every opportunity.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions or comments? Can I suggest, councillors, that this is an interesting debate, and I think we've just kind of started it really. And of course, as Mrs. Sull said, it's an opportunity for us to have a look at other parts of the Constitution. I think this would be useful if it went over certainly to our next meeting as a standing item, and hopefully we can firm up on some of the proposals that that we've considered this evening. But I think it's a useful exercise, and the Constitution is a living document, and it's absolutely right that we at least review it every year. So if we could, shall we agree that we just agree to discuss this at our next meeting? Are there any objections or abstentions to that proposal? No, I can't see any. Is that a unanimous yes then? Smiling faces. I'm going to take that. Oh, Mrs. Skull, yes.
Apologies, I'm not voting. I just wondered if it would assist if prior to the next meeting, if members did have any thoughts on areas for review, if they wanted to send those to me directly, and then I can formulate those so that there is a discussion, a document for discussion at the next meeting.
That would be very helpful. So I recommend that we pass that over to the next meeting. And I say that through gritted teeth because I'm often accused in another place of kicking the can down to the next meeting for decisions. Yes, you don't need to shake your head, Councillor Mrs. Stockwood. Okay, thank you very much, councillors. Moving on to the next item, which I think is item 7, annual governance statement.
Right, so over to me. So the governance statement, I think most of you have been on this group, well, certainly the last year, and you will probably hopefully recall the annual governance statement from last year. And really the format of the annual governance statement, if you like the structure, a lot of it is the same, but I'm going to talk to you really about some of the key differences. Now, just to remind you, it does go with the statement of accounts. So when we bring the statement of accounts in November, it will incorporate the annual governance statement, and this is signed off by the leader and the chief executive. One thing I will say is it is a fairly live document as well. So particularly at the moment with COVID, and if anything, say if anything came out of the audit, potentially that might get reflected in the annual governance, the final version of the statement. I have to say, in recent years, that hasn't necessarily happened, and the version you tend to get here is the version that is normally signed off. But particularly with COVID, it's obviously the environment's fairly in a state of flux at the moment. There's lots going on. As it's stated in paragraph 4.2 of the report, again, go back to the format, it's really we have to follow what's known as SITFA and SOLIS guidance on delivering good governance in local government. So when the auditors, they look at this statement, they look at it, check if it meets those requirements, and they also look factually at what's in the statement when they audit the accounts as well. Appendix A, which is pages 49 to 60, is really the key document. It's largely backward looking at the last financial year and governance surrounding that. But clearly, for example, with COVID, which happened right at the tail end of the financial year, that we have to look at the impact of that going forward as well in terms of the governance of the council. It is fairly standard, largely in the document, I say, in terms of the controls we have in place to manage governance. So our sort of structures and processes, unless they change. So you might recall last year when we reported this document, we were changing the scrutiny group, so that would have been reflected in the document last year. The most important part, though, is 4.1, and this is where, if you like, what are the key governance issues are. And as I say, this year there's an extra title. So if you go to Law, if you can go to just 4.1, page 57, I think it is. That's it. In actual fact, I've changed the heading this year, so it includes the impact of COVID-19 and proposed remedial actions. So that's just emphasises obviously the importance of that. And as you read through the document, it covers a range of issues ranging from the overall financial impact, the impact on income streams, potential on the leisure contract, potential impact on perhaps some of our capital projects, so things like Bingham Leisure Hub, delays in the business rates and fair funding reviews. But there are also some positive aspects. So, for example, it references the £1 million climate change reserve that we've recently set up to deal with challenges of climate change. Then, importantly, given we've got all these challenges, how we're going to keep on top of all of these. So, there's an action plan at pages 59 and 60, which is basically to keep trying, to demonstrate how we're going to keep abreast of all the various issues that have been arising. So I'm not really going to say anything else, and obviously I can take any particular questions on the statement. Really, in terms of governance, it really should reflect from what you know of the council, the key governance issues affecting the council.
Thank you, Mr. Linfield. So, councillors, do we have any comments or questions on this item? No, I take that as a no. Are there any? Well, I'll read out the recommendation. It is recommended that the Governance Scrutiny Group have an opportunity to review and approve the 2019-20 annual governance statement. I think we've had an opportunity to do that. Do we have any objections or abstentions in approving that report? I'm not seeing anybody. Did I hear something? No. No. I take that as acceptance of that report. Thank you. Moving on to item 8, the annual capital and investment strategy report 2019-20.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Good evening.
Good evening. This report summarises the outcome position of the capital and investment strategy and accords with professional practice. The report is different to normal because it incorporates the impact of COVID-19, and there are 2 key issues with this that I'll come to shortly. Section A on page 62 details the Treasury management indicators. Paragraph 4.2 explains the position on capital expenditure with an overall underspend of 19.241 million that has been reported throughout the year to the corporate overview group. Of this, 19.181 million has been carried forward into 2021. Paragraph 4.4 shows that due to the slippage, the council's overall borrowing need did not increase in 2019-20. Paragraph 4.9 explains the current agreed arrangements to repay any unfunded expenditure, and this is known as minimum revenue provision, or MRP. The council currently pays more than the MRP that is required to, and this is termed voluntary, so VRP. And this report proposes that we reduce this in order to support the budget gap that's arising as a result of COVID-19. And we could potentially resume the repayments of VRP at a later date if we choose to. This potentially could save the council, or release for the council, an extra 0.6 million per annum from new homes bonus. Paragraph 4.10 refers to the CFR, the capital financing requirement, and this has reduced by 1 million as a result of repayment of the MRP. Paragraphs 4.11 and 4 to 4.14 refer to the borrowing indicators, but as we have no borrowing, this is not relevant to us. 4.15 shows the ratio of financing costs to net revenue stream, and this is lower than we originally estimated due to higher interest that we've earned during the year. Paragraph 4.17 shows that we were well below the upper limit for sums invested over 1 year. In paragraph 4.18, it details the council's investments as at the 31st of March 2020, and this totals around 35 million. Paragraph 4.19 shows that the council expected the interest rates to remain at 0.75, but as we now know, this has reduced to 0.1. And this, coupled with the need for liquidity arising out of COVID-19, means that we are largely holding most of our investments in the money markets, as this is easier to gain access to on a short term. Paragraph 4.20 explains that while interest rates have fallen, we have still received interest above budget. This is £638,000 against a budget of £201,000. And this is as a result of investing in higher earning accounts. Now, the downside to this is they come with higher risks. And as a result, at the 31st of March 2020, the fair value of these investments had fallen by 1.238 million. Since the end of the year, we have information relating to 2 months further details, and this is recovered already by 0.5 million. And this is the second key issue as a result of COVID. Moving on to section B on page 68, it shows the performance of the asset investment strategy. The table at paragraph 4.27 shows the current position of the allocations from the asset investment strategy. And it shows a good spread of risks, but there is 3.828 million that is unallocated on the bottom left of the table. The table at 4.30 shows that the council is not over-reliant upon commercial income as a proportion of total council income, and we are well below the target of 30%. Paragraph 4.31 explains why the council have recently reined in their commercial investments, and this is due to potential restrictions following a pending PWLB consultation. This is the board that loans local councils money. Future use of the unallocated funds will be dependent upon the outcome of this consultation. The position remains fluid, and risk associated with both Treasury and commercial investments and potential returns affecting the medium-term financial strategy, exacerbated by the longer-term impact of COVID-19 on both Treasury function and capital programme. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Sarah. Are there any questions or comments for Sarah? Councillor Verdi.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Sarah, for the summary of your report. Just going back to a very quick question on the capital programme, paragraph 4.2, the reference that you've made to 19.1 million being carried forward. I'm just wondering, in terms of the current scenario and issues, and maybe I'm jumping the gun in terms of budgetary sort of reviews and planning for next year. Maybe this is also for Peter, but in terms of that 19 million carried forward and our proposed capital programme, the slippage in that programme, are there any plans or proposals to review that for the next year to help further plug the gap if we have any shortfalls in the areas that you've referred to?
Yep,
Thank you.
Yes, as you referred to, some of the items in the capital programme that have slipped are items that we are committed to, but at the moment we are reviewing the items that are planned in the capital programme, and these will be reported back to council in the report due for September.
Mr. Linfield?
Yeah, just in terms of, I mean, it's a valid point. I mean, we are looking, and that's why going back to the issues like it was mentioned about Moorbridge, which one scheme we've decided not to proceed with given the current financial climate. If you think of the capital programme itself, though, the two really largest schemes are things that we are sort of committed to at the moment. That's the Bingham Leisure Hub, which is £20 million, and the £6.5 million for the crematorium. And obviously there is work going on at the moment. So for example, we're going out to tender and things like that. And clearly we need to see what comes back in terms of the costs and all of that. So there will be ongoing reviews of those particular projects as we get more information.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Thank you, Peter and Sarah, for that. I suppose from my perspective, in terms of raising that question and the current scenario that we as a borough are facing, it would be useful, I think, to have some timelines around that process in terms of the assessment of where we are and those changing plans. So I'm not asking for that here, obviously, but I assume, as you say, that's coming back to Cabinet or full council. But I'd be interested to see that fairly swiftly. Thank you, Chair.
Yes. Yeah, there are. I mean, you're right, but because given the significance of those projects, there are separate reports that have been going to Cabinet, and of course we've got a full council in September where we're reviewing the issues surrounding the MTFS and COVID. So that will also address some of those issues.
And it's a good time to remind councillors that I think we're having some workshops in September. I think, yeah. Councillor John Stockwood, did I see your hand? Yep.
And I'll unmute myself. Thank you very much. The recommendation going forward, if the second part about the MRP seems to suggest that the arena will be looking to pay it off over 25 years rather than 10 years on the internal arrangements. So looking across the borough, we have a very long commitment to a PFI arrangement in Eastleigh. It now seems to have a very long commitment to an arena in West Bridgford. So I don't think it's unreasonable to make a long-term commitment to something in Bingham and spread our interests across Rushcliffe, which I think is a very appropriate position to move forward in with regard to our capital programme. Looking at the actual report, I'm not quite understanding the use of the term commercial investments. So in the commercial investments on page 70, it seems to suggest that by 2024-25, the total contribution will be 1.783 million. Just looking back to what we've agreed in the annual governance statement, it states on page 59 that the asset investment strategy currently identifies 1.2 million in net income being generated from commercial investments, expected to rise to 2.13 million by 2024-2025. So if in the annual government statement 2019-2020 has one figure for commercial investments, I'm not quite sure why we have a different figure in the annual capital investment strategy report for the same financial period. So can you explain the difference there with regards to what are how we're having different levels of commercial investments in different documents? And because these figures that are in the document we're considering now, looking at the equivalent document last year, the figures were much higher, and there is clearly a downturn there in our projections, not just this year, but over the next, what's going to happen in the 5 years. So with regards to the recommendation, I'm saying the MRP changes mean it's a very long commitment we're going to enter into with regards to the West Bridgford Arena now. And with regards to the report, I just asked some questions about the commercial investments and how that relates to what was said in the annual government statement. Thank you.
Okay.
So obviously there's always this issue about which figure you're going to use. If you look at the 2.2 million, if you look at the on page 70, the gross commercial property income is 2.2 million. That's the figure that's been quoted. That explains that particular difference. The issue about paying for the arena's already been paid for. What we're talking about now is effectively how that is reflected in the budget going forward. And rather than having additional payments through voluntary revenue provision, which we still actually might still do that depending on our financial position, what we're doing is creating, if you like, some fiscal leverage to give us an option whereby we can actually change that figure if we need to support the budget.
Mr. Chairman, I just repeat that the annual government says net income, and if we're using gross income, we should make that distinction and use the figure that same figures throughout. With regards to the internal repayments that are being made, yes, it was paid for, but we're paying it back through internal borrowing. My recollection of the training that we had each year regarding Treasury was we were advised to do internal borrowing first, and that's how we were funding the arena. So I still think it's now becoming very apparent that we're having to make these very long-term commitments. And I repeat that if we're going to use gross figures, we should say gross and not net. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions or comments, councillors? No, thank you. We've been given the opportunity to review that. The recommendation is it is recommended that Governance Scrutiny Group A agree the 2019-20 outturn position, and B recommend to full council as part of the medium-term financial strategy the reduction in minimum revenue provision, the MRP, paragraph 4.9, and subsequent release of new homes bonus to either support the budget gap resulting from COVID-19 or to make voluntary repayment provision, VRP, at a later date. Are there any objections or abstentions to that recommendation? I don't see any. I'm going to take it then that that recommendation is approved. Thank you. Okay, moving on. What's my page now? To item 9, impact of COVID-19 on risk. Mr. Linfield?
Yeah, so check I'm muted. Can you hear me okay? Yeah. Yes.
Are you a bit patchy there?
Can you hear me? Okay, that's good. Yeah, so obviously I've touched on COVID-19 already at this meeting, and clearly it's a big risk for us overall. The report really is twofold in that it provides an update on existing risks on the corporate risk register, specifically as a result of COVID-19, and recommends the adoption of additional risks to the corporate risk register as a result of COVID-19. The current register contains 37 corporate risks and 26 operational risks. Appendix A, which is pages 81 to 85, contains the existing risk register, including 20 changes to risk ratings as a result of COVID-19 and additional operational improvement works allowing better control and mitigation measures. There are 13 risk ratings that have been increased, and these are highlighted at paragraph 4.3 of the report, which is pages 76 to 77. Sorry, Laura, you're having to dot about a bit on this one. And that highlights there's 13 that have increased, and also that there are 7 that have decreased, which are on page 77, along with the respective reasons. Appendix A does contain details of the changes that have been made as well and why, so that they're sort of reiterated in the actual appendix. Appendix B also contains new risks directly linked to COVID-19, which are pages 87 to 91. And there's also one there linked right at the end on page 91, which is to do with reorganisation in local government. And if accepted, the intention would be that these risks would be subsumed into the risk register and reported on as normal, and when we do our risk management updates. There's quite a chunk of work in there that we've, as you can imagine, as a result of the impact of COVID.
Thank you. And I remember an early Downing Street briefing. We were promised that we would have this this virus whacked after 12 weeks or so, and it's now turning into an industry. But I do agree that reasonable steps are being taken to consider managing the various risks. Are there any comments and questions? Councillor John Stockwood.
I honestly thought I was going to be second there, because we did talk about risk a little bit. I think at was it the 1st or September 2019, 17th September 2019, when we had our first look at the risk register. And at that point in time, we did decide as a scrutiny group that the action would be that when we have new red risks, that particularly we're interested in seeing who is responsible for mitigating those risks, and the quantitative values of impact of those risks, the financial impact, so specifically the financial impact of a risk. I think what we're seeing here in this report is that particularly 7 of the changes that are being made are not just that risks are increasing, but risks are going to a point where they are now an alert, that they've gone to the highest level of risk, and that we're particularly concerned about inadequate capital reserves, free income, the asset investment strategy, the transformation strategy failure, cyber attack, growth deal 2 funding. So now that we've chosen to, we're looking at this as changing the risk register to have these very high level warnings on these particular risks. The single line sentences don't seem to reflect what I felt we asked for at Scrutiny in particular. I think it was Councillor Verdi who made the particular point that when looking at a risk, we were wanting to know not just what it is, but how are we going to mitigate it, and what is the extent to the risk, that how concerned we should be, and how fast we need to be asking for a timeline to make sure that that risk is mitigated. So I think the report makes a number of changes to the existing risk register, which we last considered in September, and that those changes make some of the risks very high, and that we would look to have more detail about what's going to actually be done to address those. And I think some of the new risks, each one of them has a different rating, which would calculate, and only some of those are also very high level alerts. And so particularly, I'd like to hear about how the previous scrutiny feedback and the previous scrutiny action was taken on board when preparing this report, and how we're talking about the mitigation of these things, these risks that are very much increasing and now warning. You're telling us that there are warnings and there are alerts, but the single line sentence explanations don't really tell us what's going to be done about it. So there's explanations for some of the new stuff, but you're changing some of the existing stuff as well. And so for changes to existing stuff, I'd like to hear more about what's going to be done to stop it. Just saying cyber attack exists as an issue, yes, it does. What additional measures are we going to take, and how, who's going to take on board that, and making sure that it happens very quickly to stop risks escalating to the point where they become a certainty, which is what I think we're trying to avoid. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Linfield. You're muted.
Get used to this technology eventually. Yes, I take on board what you say. I mean, bear in mind this. What we're trying to do at these scrutiny groups is try and keep you away out of the weeds, really. And I did say the last time this was mentioned, we try and keep this. We're trying to keep it at a high level. There's a lot of information in the report already. We can give you lots more information, but you're just going to, quite frankly, just going to get lost with it. The other point I'd make is we are, and I know the member services have been in contact, I think, with the chair and the vice chair over a risk management training session. And I think as part of that, perhaps we can focus on some of these issues that you've been talking about, and perhaps take things forward there. I'm more conscious about, and I said what you're saying, but if we started putting lots of more information in, quite frankly, there'd be too much information.
Councillor Stockwood.
I just briefly come back. I appreciate the need for strategic reporting, but then what I need to know, what I would hope the council would be told is that there are mitigation, a commitment that in noting this report, that those reports that are now being moved to a high level, that there is a mitigation measures in place, and that we will be seeing within our work programme those alerts coming down. I know that the risk register is up for the work programme to the next council committee meeting, and I have received the invite to the training, and we're always very grateful for those opportunities. But in noting this report, I would like to be assured that there's going to be mitigation measures for the risks and escalating existing risks, and that when we look at the next report in the next meeting, there will be a de-escalation of some of these risks, and I hope the officers can offer that assurance. Thank you.
You're muted.
Mute. Oh, okay. Sorry, just to give you obviously assurance, clearly in the background that we've got a lot more, there's more monitoring going on in terms of what we're doing mitigation. Not necessarily one thing I will say is not everything. There are some things, some larger risks to do with COVID. Quite frankly, there's only so much we could actually do in any case. You don't have, we can have monitoring in place and things like that, but there's certain things that may in fact be out of our control, particularly when there's an international crisis.
I think it's fair to say that we've been sort of feeling our way in the dark for the last 4 or 5 months, and we've, the priority in the early days clearly was health, NHS and all of that. And of course, later on, it's developing into a financial resource issue as well, which clearly brings in all levels of councils. And I think we can be generous, Mr. Linfield, in that it has been identified. We are still going through the implications and consequences of this terrible period in our history, and I'm sure we'll be soon getting on top of it in terms of the information that Councillor Stockwood is looking for. Did I see anybody? Oh, Councillor Verdi.
Thank you, Chair. And without repeating everything Councillor Stockwood has just gone through, and yes, he did pick me to the post, so with his putting his hand up. But this was indeed a point I raised at a previous meeting, and I am quite passionate about this, and I do recognise, Peter, the magnitude of work involved and what we have in front of us. And the asset management strategy, for example, has lots of numbers and tables and facts and figures and so on. So I do appreciate that. However, with this particular area, quantifying, particularly as Councillor Stockwood has says the risks which have suddenly emerged, and for example, FCS 08 has gone from 6 to 12, or FC 09 from 8 to 16. I think some of them do warrant a quantification to allow us to really appreciate if those risks were realised and there were, negative impacts on the council, then that is quite critical. I, for one, would certainly want to see, for example, if a risk has gone from 8 to 12, and I'm just trying to remind myself which one it was, but inadequate capital resources, going from 6 to 12, that's quite significant. So appreciating that we don't want too much detail, I would still like to see maybe a selection of these presented in a way where we can quantify the reality of that potential impact. So I'm not going to say any more than that. It is a point I've raised before, and Councillor Stockwood has summarised it very well again. So I would endorse what he has proposed, which is in future meetings, if we can either have the mitigation strategy on some of these, or certainly the quantification elements presented to us, I feel more comfortable. Thank you, Chair.
Sorry, can I just, I think what will be useful is we've got the training session coming up, and that will give us some time perhaps to talk a bit more over this subject, and perhaps at that point we can perhaps focus on some of the examples, and that might just think about the timing of everything.
Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Chair. I personally feel that was a bit of an unfair kind of statements on the officers. I feel that when you run through these risks, the risks are financial, which is largely due to the fact that central government suggested that local governments could go do what they required to get us through COVID and have fallen short. So to put that on our officers is unfair, and they need to ride this out and see what they can do. Number two, the other issues on this risk register are health, and there's no way that they can make any judgments or calls or mitigations at this stage about the health and the risks that are going to kind of transpire in the next few months. So I think what you're asking from them is actually not quite fair. Thank you.
I absolutely agree with you, but I think we have 44 councillors who are passionate in the subject topics that they are allotted, and are clearly avaricious for information and facts. And I think, given that we've identified the risk that we are currently, within, I don't think it would be unreasonable for us to perhaps have a look at that COVID risk register at the next meeting, really, to see if we have any updates. It's a fast moving situation we are in at the moment, and I fully accept that we are reacting mostly. Maybe we're beginning to sort of get into a situation where we are being more proactive in managing this virus, but given the urgency of it and the importance of it, I wonder, would the next meeting be an appropriate time to just keep us abreast of what you've identified?
Yeah, just to add, obviously we've got the training session, so I will look, perhaps provide some examples there about surrounding mitigation, so that can be a sort of discussion part of that particular training session. And also there is the risk management strategy actually that is coming to the next meeting, so
it is actually, yes, of course, yes,
we can provide an update then as well.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, thank you, and they're all valid comments from councillors. Thank you very much for those. It is recommended that this group A, notes the contents of this report in relation to existing risks, and B, considers the new risks identified in response to the global COVID-19 pandemic, and makes any comment necessary on the risk ratings awarded to them. And I think we've had plenty of opportunity to consider that. Just to clarify, there's no objections or abstentions, that we accept that. Thank you. I will take that as it is accepted. Moving on to item 10, the annual, the fraud annual report 2019-20.
I'll just do a quick introduction. Hopefully Gurpreet's there somewhere. Hello?
Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah, okay, that's good.
Right. I'm sorry we kept you right to the end.
That's okay, not a problem.
the new auditors are so keen, they do want to sit through the whole meeting and going on. So obviously they get a better feel for the authority that way as well. So,
Excellent.
So just to explain then, this is the annual report. I know it's annual, we've did it last year and also we've done one this year. It focused on the extent of fraud at the council in the body of the report, and thankfully we don't really have any fraud as such. But also the difference in this one as well is we've introduced the new anti-fraud and corruption policy, which is at Appendix A, which is to comply with the function standards for counter fraud, which are highlighted at Appendix B. Just to explain the process, so I sort of looked at sort of, I suppose, best practice really in terms of what's around in terms of the fraud strategy, and then I've asked BDO to basically review it as well as they've put together the report in terms of the fraud report, and BDO really assess compliance with the policy and the standards, which Gurpreet will no doubt comment on in his brief presentation. So over to Gurpreet.
Cool. Thanks, Pete. So the first page, which I think is actually page 93, was 93 on my pack. If we go to that part on the screen, if that's okay. Yeah. So as Pete mentioned, there's two parts of this. There's the annual fraud report, which we ask you to note, and obviously there's the approval of the updated 2020-2024 anti-fraud and corruption policy, which I'll talk about afterwards. So this first document is the annual fraud report. So this sets out on a high level the key activities that the council have done in the last 12 months in terms of identifying incidents of fraud, how you prevent and detect fraud, and there's some tables that I'll highlight for your attention in a moment. So in 4.1, that's just a bit of a high-level summary from CIPFA's latest statistics on what's happening in fraud-related activity in local government. I think the key thing to note there is that they still see the three key fraud areas at the moment being procurement, single-person discount for council tax, and adult social care. Obviously, the last one doesn't apply to yourselves, but the first two do. And a number of the areas have remained static, apart from single-person discount, which has had a £3.6 million increase in kind of fraud activity. But there is some statistics on that, which I'll talk about in a moment. In point 4.3 onwards, under the heading Preventing and Detecting Fraud, that just sets out on a high level what the council arrangements are for preventing and detecting fraud. There isn't an in-house, there is not an in-house team. However, it's incumbent on the responsibility of service managers, obviously ourselves as internal audit, external audit and others, to identify fraud, but there haven't been any incidents of fraud allegations raised to the authority in the last 12 months. And so this just sets out some of those arrangements. And obviously during the year as we do our plan, we always will remain professionally skeptical. And we know that because of COVID-19, there are some areas which are seeing increased areas of and kind of increased risks of fraud. And so we'll be professionally skeptical about that as we go through the year to see if there's anything we may identify. In 4.9, it just highlights that the authority have a whistleblowing policy. And I think what probably is a key part of this first report is some of the statistics. So the council engage with us, as all authorities do, with the National Fraud Initiative. So in 4.11, it just sets out what that is. So the council provide data as part of this, and it's matched and then provided back to the authority to identify what could be a potential fraud. And then the authority are responsible for investigating these. You can see in 4.13 and 4.15, it gives the statistics as for this exercise for council tax single person discount. So in August, there was 894 matches. None of those were identified as fraud, but actually it did result in 50 changes to people's accounts. And also it gives you the total value of what that is. So they're not frauds, but the match process did identify there are areas where contact with individuals had meant that there would have been a change in their balance. And then in 4.15, it shows the same, but for the 15th of January figures. I won't pick out all of these if there are questions. I think another key area is within 4.19, just over the page. In terms of benefit fraud, all local authorities do not have the responsibility for investigating benefit fraud anymore. It's done centrally by the DWP. And as part of that, they provide data on the referrals that they would have received for your patch. I mean, what's quite useful to see there and probably quite assuring is the local authority average in terms of your average referrals is slightly less than the total amount for Great Britain. And so there are fewer referrals coming through to them. And the same in terms of the local authority referrals per caseload, you're at a slightly lower percentage at 0.06 versus 0.15 nationally. It's worth noting in 4.22, just over the page, because of COVID-19, Q3 and Q4 data wasn't available. So that's nothing to do with Rushcliffe. That's just a national piece that it wasn't available. And so there is a note there to say that at a later date, once that's provided, we can provide a revised report to this committee and update the tables. So you have the full year figures, but at this stage, we don't have those. So that, and then obviously you have the normal disclaimers towards the back. So that sets out, as I mentioned, the kind of key areas of fraud risk, what the authority have in place, and then some of the statistics around single person discount and benefit fraud in particular. And then the next page, and I don't know if you want me to pause there and take questions or to continue to the counter fraud policy and then take any questions at the end, Chair.
We will take questions at the end. Thank you.
Okay. So you'll see in Appendix A, which is page 99, is the Anti-Fraud and Corruption Policy 2020-2024. So on the following pages is the policy. What's probably most useful is actually to skip down towards, and it's right at the end. So it's on page 124 of the pack. So what this, so the government set out in 2018 the counter fraud functional standards, and they set this across all government departments at first to say here are the standards that should be in place for any counter fraud policy. So what we've done, and now this is being rolled out to local authorities and is a requirement. So we've looked at the policy that you have, compared it to other local authorities, but then critically also to the government functional standards which have been released. And what we've done is then suggested amendments which have been implemented here. So in the left-hand column, it says what the policy should set out. In the right-hand column, it says what your policy did say. And then if there are any additions that we've suggested, which have been incorporated in the policy above. So in the third one down, where it says how the organisation deals with fraud, bribery and corruption, including activity to find fraud, it notes there that there are new sections in 3.6 and 4.4. And that's because that's highlighted from the functional standards that they should be in there. So that table there summarises the changes rather than me going through the whole policy. But effectively, with the changes that have now been made, we believe the policy is now in line with the government functional standards, which has only just been released for local authorities. So the council are kind of immediately in line with what's required. I think one key thing there to note is there's a requirement to do a fraud risk assessment. So that's to go through all the different departments and activities of the authority and identify, so what is the risk of fraud within those areas, obviously, which may have changed because of COVID. And provisionally, we have had discussions with Pete and others around including that within this year's audit plan, because there is one review which came out of the audit plan post the last committee. And so therefore there would be the availability for us to that counter fraud risk assessment to bring to this committee later this year. So that will then give you a picture of our view of what the key risks are in the authority, which might then lead to further work in terms of investigating certain areas or undertaking reviews later on, which will hopefully help embed more of a culture of counter fraud within the authority on top of this policy. So they're the two papers. I think the first one's to note, and I think the second one asks for approval, but Pete may be able to clarify that.
Thank you, Gurpreet. Thank you for that extremely clear presentation. Thank you. Any comments or questions, councillors? No. I think there's been a lot of reassurance for us there that things are on track. Mr. Linfield.
Yeah, and just to add that obviously some of the actions that we'll undertake, when we bring this plan again, or the report for next year, we'll be reporting on the fact of what we've been doing this year as well. So to update this.
Thank you. Okay, we'll move to the recommendation that the Governance Scrutiny Group A, notes the annual fraud report for 2019-20, and B, approves the revised anti-fraud and corruption policy 2020 to 2024 with the summary just explained there. Thank you. Okay, anybody object or wishes to abstain on that recommendation? No, I'm not picking anything up from there. So I'm assuming that we are all in agreement. Thank you very much. That concludes the meat substantial items. Thank you very much, Gurpreet, for coming along this evening.
Thank you, everyone.
I hope you've enjoyed it so far as much as we have. That takes it up to item 11, the work programme, 30th of July 2020. I think with what has been mentioned tonight, with items for September, we will have another busy meeting. Any comments, questions? No. I'm going to say that that is...
Chair.
Sorry, Councillor Walker. You're cleaning windows there, sorry.
Just because I just saw Pete waving, that was all.
Yeah, so I was just trying to grab your attention, Chair.
Oh, sorry, you're not on my screen, Peter. You've disappeared.
It's terrible. Just to point out that the statement of accounts, which is in for the September meeting, will be going to the November meeting, the work programme.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. Thank you. Yeah, so a question from Councillor Walker. Which is, will the Constitution be added to the September meeting? Peter, is there any way I can stop that?
I think you've agreed that you intended to take it there.
I'm not allowed to change my mind then, no?
Well, no, you might have a belling on your hands from the rest of the
right.
group.
Okay, it's in writing. You've got it on for next month or next time. Peter, can you pass on our sincere thanks for anyone from you downwards who have worked extremely hard over the last 5 months or so. Basically, every one of you at Rushcliffe have kept the show on the road. That's been absolutely vital. And I know that you've been acting on delegated authority from Downing Street right the way through all the upper tiers and so forth. And it is very much appreciated by all councillors with what is being done and continues to be done. Yes, I said it's turning into an industry. It's clear that we are facing an ongoing battle, which at the moment, I'm informed, is not a crisis in Nottinghamshire. It is very much business as usual, given the new normal, and we're not in the position of some other places. But who knows what might come in the next few months. So anyway, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Chair. And also I'd like to thank councillors for their support as well. And I know it's difficult for everyone at this moment. So thank you.
Yeah. Okay, councillors, can I call a close to the meeting at 8:34? Thank you.